Hello, everybody, and welcome to Backfired, an NBA history podcast about bad teams, bad luck, and bad decisions. My name is Lewis, and today we're going to talk about something really unfortunate that happened to Mitch Richmond, as well as something unfortunate that happened to the Sacramento Kings. It's not quite as bad as, say, missing the playoffs 16 seasons in a row, but at the stakes that basketball are at, this is just about as bad as it gets for Mitch Richmond. But first, I wanted to talk about the Jaren Jackson Jr. stuff that went down this weekend. For those unaware, there was a conspiracy posted on the NBA subreddit at 4:42 a.m. Eastern Time. This is now the 13th most popular post in the sub's history, so I'm going to read some parts here and mostly summarize it because it's very long. It starts out in all caps. Memphis Grizzlies scorekeeper posting fraudulent numbers for Defensive Player of the Year leader Jaren Jackson Jr. I would like to bring to your attention the scorekeeper of the Memphis Grizzlies. I was wondering how a solid defensive player can suddenly have some specific statistical categories that are completely off the charts. I'm referring to Jaren Jackson Jr., who, after having missed 16 games to start the season due to off-season foot surgery, immediately started having extreme outlier high steals plus blocks statistics, leading the entire NBA in blocks per game by a wide margin. In fewer minutes per game than other players, Jaren Jackson repeatedly gets outlandish block numbers at home. I decided to take a closer look at his games, and immediately one thing became crystal clear. They then go into his home and road splits, which are staggering, yes. At the time of the post, he was averaging 4.1 blocks at home and 2.2 on the road, 1.4 steals at home, and just 0.6 on the road. So 5.5 stocks, steals plus blocks, at home versus 2.8 in the road. And yeah, that is certainly a very stark difference. They then go on to say, quote, I decided to watch two Memphis Grizzlies games where he had one of his ludicrous 8+ stocks games. By my count, he actually had 3 fewer stocks than he was credited for by the home scorekeeper. I wonder if the scorekeeper has some sort of vested interest in Jaren Jackson getting maximum high-value defensive statistics that he thinks he can get away with putting down into the box score. So the post goes on to mention how Jaren's Defensive Player of the Year odds were plus 10,000 this summer when he was sidelined with a stress fracture in his foot. And now that he's playing, he is the prohibitive favorite, in part due to the huge block numbers that he's putting up. Of course, that doesn't tell the entire story, but it's a consideration. And this difference is much more stark than last season, where he averaged 3.5 stocks at home and 3 on the road. So here is the accusation portion of the post. My educated guess is that the Memphis scorekeepers have been changed since last season, or ulterior motives and incentives are now in play with respect to JJJ's defensive statistics. 3 possible explanations, only one of which is innocent. Number 1, Jaren Jackson plays much harder at home and hustles like a maniac and focuses on stealing and blocking shots in Memphis. This can almost certainly be discounted because I looked at his other statistics and everything else is close in terms of home-road splits. Number 2, the Memphis scorekeeper is a huge Jaren Jackson Jr. fan and is purposely embellishing his steals and blocks, since that is much easier to do than points or rebounds. When he contests a shot well, but does not touch the ball, perhaps the scorekeeper purposely gives him the undeserved stat and donates blocks to him where none occurred, for instance. Number 3, it should also be investigated in this age of fantasy basketball and gambling on sports whether this scorekeeper and or his family and friends bet on Jaren Jackson to win the Defensive Player of the Year award at super long odds, and as a result has tremendous financial incentive to juice and fake a player's 2 most valuable defensive statistics, blocks and steals, the easiest to fudge numbers. So then they give 7 examples of what they call questionable or outright wrong steals and blocks gifted to Jaren, and they say this is a very small percentage of them. And if you haven't seen these videos are all in a Google Sheet that's linked in the description of this episode. Only 6 of the 7 have video publicly available, so I'll defend the 6 of them that I have video for. Example number 1, this is block number 56 in the Google Sheet. Zion Williamson drives to the basket, never shoots the ball, and loses it. Scorekeeper in Memphis graded the play as a Jaren Jackson Jr. block on Zion Williamson's 3-foot driving layup. So by rule, this one is a block because Jaren strips the ball from Zion while he's in the early stages of bringing the ball up to shoot a shot. So that one is correct, technically. Example number 2, steal number 22 in the Google Sheet. Jordan Clarkson throws a bad pass directly to Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson, for some odd reason, is credited with the steal. Bane actually steals the ball. Well, on this one, the ball is tipped by Jaren Jackson Jr. on its way to Bane, so it is technically a steal for Jaren. Example number 3, steal number 24. Kelly Olynyk loses the ball while being defended by Xavier Tillman. The ball then bounces off Tillman and Jaren Jackson before being picked up by Tillman. The steal should be credited to Tillman. Memphis scorekeeper grades the play as Jaren Jackson Jr. steals. For this one, Jaren is the one who actually steals the ball. Tillman does pick up the ball, but Jaren is the one who initiates the steal. Example number 4, block number 85. Brandon Clark blocks Saban Lee's layup, but the Memphis scorekeeper instantly gives the block to nearby Jaren Jackson Jr. This one is completely disingenuous. Jaren Jackson Jr. is not simply nearby. Jaren and Brandon both block the shot at the exact same time, so that's just a toss-up as to who gets the one block, because they can't both get it. Example number 5, steal number 28. Lamar Stevens, who Jaren Jackson helps on, loses the ball and Desmond Bane picks it up and gains possession. The Memphis scorekeeper gave steal to Jaren Jackson. The clip doesn't show Lamar Stevens simply losing the ball. It shows Jaren Jackson wrestling the ball away from Stevens and then Bane picking it up. So again, Jaren initiates the steal. And finally, example number 6, this is steal number 10. Jackson deflects a pass and never gains possession, saved back to Detroit player. Memphis scorekeeper gives a steal to Jackson. This one, I agree with. I wouldn't call it a steal, but because the referee indicated that it was a new possession when Jaren touched the ball, it is technically a steal. That's not something determined by the scorekeeper. I would call it a mistake by the referee, but by rule, it was a new possession for Memphis, short as it was because Detroit immediately picks the ball back up. But that possession has to be initiated by something. So again, by rule, it is a Jaren Jackson steal because he's the one that touched it and initiated the new possession. Now, of course, Reddit, Twitter, just about everywhere ran with this theory that Jaren's stats are fake. They're inflated, peddling the same video evidence that shows the stats being correctly attributed. Everyone was primed to see something wrong with what was happening, and it's just amazing to me what the power of suggestion can do to people who are not very informed and seemingly don't know some pretty basic rules about the game that they're a fan of. This whole thing stemmed from one person typing up a very long write-up where they essentially reveal to the world that they either don't have good eyesight or just don't know how steals are awarded to players. But in the case of Brandon and Jaren blocking a shot at the same time, just completely lying about what's happening on the play. But people were coming for this Grizzlies scorekeeper when in reality, everything is reviewed by the NBA after the fact. That's why stat corrections happen after games. Some triple-doubles have been taken away. Notably, I know LeBron has lost 1 or 2 over the years because a rebound was shifted from him to Love or somebody else. Of course, there have been instances where a scorekeeper does fudge the numbers. Episode 26 of this show talks about a disillusioned Vancouver Grizzlies scorekeeper who gave Nick Van Exel a ton of undeserved assists. Go listen to that episode for an example of a scorekeeper admitting to several instances of posting fraudulent numbers for players that he liked and disliked. This guy mentions how he didn't like Dikembe Mutombo, so he just didn't give Mutombo blocks in Vancouver. Thankfully, Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer and Kurt Goldsberry of ESPN each posted Twitter threads debunking this post's claims. They went through every one of Jaren's blocks and steals at home this season and verified that there were only really 2 to 3 misattributed to him, which is bound to happen and not malicious. I also made a Reddit thread based on the Google sheet that I mentioned that's in the episode description. It goes over not only his home blocks, but his away blocks as well. Important to note that I posted mine 14 minutes before Kevin O'Connor and 90 minutes before Kurt Goldsberry. So, it's totally fine that I'm not getting the same credit that they are. Obviously, it's not that big a deal. I'm just glad that Jaren's name is cleared. Everybody knows now that he's a great defensive player. So as for the stark difference in his performance from last year to this year, he was great last year, first team all defense, but this year he's on a completely other level. It's honestly like he's a different player on both ends of the floor, more confident, smarter about what shots to contest. He still fouls all the time. A lot of those fouls are phantom calls. You should check out his foul. Maybe I'll make a foul compilation, a phantom foul compilation of Jaren Jackson. Who knows? But, obviously he's good enough to be the favorite for Defensive Player of the Year, even with his foul troubles. As for the stark difference in his performance at home versus on the road, the Grizzlies suck on the road, and they're really good at home. That's all there is to it. Just a rough day for the NBA subreddit. Since then, there have been several other viral conspiracies that have been quickly debunked, but believed for a few hours. There's a Walker Kessler birther conspiracy going around. A Lakers fan claiming that the Celtics were 26-2 when reffed by a certain referee in the last few years, when that wasn't true. Just goes to show you that the internet was a mistake. Except for this podcast. So while it is hilarious that one fallacious Reddit post did alter sports betting markets for a few hours, I'm going to get off my Jaren Jackson Jr. for Defensive Player of the Year soapbox and talk about Mitch Richmond and Billy Owens and the Kings and the Warriors. So let's start with Mitch Richmond. Mitch Richmond could do it all. He was one of the great scorers ever. He took a ton of mid-range shots and was extremely efficient from there. Great three-point shooter as well, although he didn't shoot the three very much when he was on the Golden State Warriors, where he started his career after being drafted 5th overall out of Kansas State in the 1988 draft. Richmond made an immediate impact for the Warriors, pouring in 22 points per game as a rookie alongside fourth-year small forward Chris Mullin, and under the guidance of first-year head coach Don Nelson. First year in Golden State, that is. He had been the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks for 11 years before that. So those three powered the Warriors to a 43-39 record and a first-round playoff victory over the Utah Jazz. A couple things to note on that. One, this 1989 Golden State team is just full of names. You got Winston Garland, the father of Darius Garland. You got John Starks in his rookie season. Manute Bol, this is the season that Manute started shooting threes. That was something that Don Nelson really liked. And two, the Warriors sweeping the Jazz 3-0 in the first round was a massive upset, and just the second time that a 7 seed ever defeated a 2 seed in the first round in NBA history. So if you want to hear more about massive playoff upsets staged by 7 and 8 seeds, go ahead and check out episodes 17 and 22 of this podcast. And I will be making more episodes about playoff upsets. I do promise that. I haven't forgotten about that series. I just wanted to finish reading Blood in the Garden by Chris Herring before making the next episode about playoff upsets, because it's heavily features the Knicks, and, it's a book about the Knicks. So this Warriors team pulled off a major upset again 2 years later, beating the 2 seed San Antonio Spurs in the first round, this time with the help of Tim Hardaway Sr., who was the final Infinity Stone, Chaos Emerald, Dragon Ball, whatever reference you want to make in the short-lived but iconic triumvirate Run TMC. TMC standing for Tim Hardaway, Mitch Richmond, and Chris Mullin. Run TMC was a high-scoring, fast-paced 2-year era of the Golden State Warriors. In the 1991 season, all three of those guys scored over 20 points per game. It's very rare for a team to have 3 20-point-per-game scorers on the same team, and in fact, since 1990, there have only been 5 teams where that's happened. 4 of them were Warriors teams: the 1991 Run TMC, the 2008 team, which was the follow-up to the We Believe Warriors, and then 2 iterations of the Steph Clay and KD Warriors. And the 5th team to accomplish that feat was the 2014 Kings, where DeMarcus Cousins, Isaiah Thomas, and Rudy Gay all scored over 20 points per game. And that team went 28-54. Now, Run TMC was a really fun 2 years in Warriors history, but it came to an abrupt end in the fall of 1991 when the Warriors traded Richmond, fresh off of a great season and a successful postseason, to the floundering Sacramento Kings, and they did that to get Billy Owens, who was the 3rd pick in the 1991 draft, the reigning Big East Player of the Year, a high-scoring 6'8" or 6'9", depending on the source, shooting guard and small forward, lauded for his positional flexibility. He could also be a power forward if need be. Owens had been drafted by the Kings, but at a luncheon introducing him to a room full of Kings season ticket holders, Owens declared that he really wanted to be a Los Angeles Laker, but more realistically, he had wanted to go to the New Jersey Nets with the 2nd pick so that he could play with Derek Coleman, who was his Syracuse teammate and the 1st overall pick the year before. But then he made sure to clarify, quote, "I'm down here with the Kings, and I'm going to make the best of it." After being drafted and making it known that the Kings weren't even his second choice, Owens and his agent Arn Tellem played the waiting game when it came to negotiating his rookie contract. This was extremely common for top draft picks back in those days. Almost always the guy signed the deal, but often the holdouts lasted until training camp or even a few days into the season, as was the case for example, Kenny Anderson, who was the number 2 pick by the Nets that year. Owens was no exception to that trend. He wanted to wait and be the final person signed to the Kings so that he could get the rest of the money that the Kings could offer. This was before rookie scale contracts established a set salary range for each pick in the first round. The Kings had drafted several players. They'd not only gotten Owens, but also Pete Chilcutt in the first round. They also picked up 2 second-rounders, and they planned on renegotiating a couple of veteran players' contracts as well. So they had a lot of business to attend to, and while the Kings wanted to get Billy Owens under contract, they knew the game. They weren't really panicked about what was going on until Dikembe Mutombo signed his contract in Denver in early October. So the Kings had been standing firm with an offer of $1.1 million per year plus deferred salary. But Mutombo, who was the first of the top 5 lottery picks in 91 to agree to a contract and thus set the market, he signed for 5 years, $13.75 million, or $2.75 million a year. So Owens, who was drafted 1 spot above Mutombo, was not about to sign for less than $2.75 million. The Kings brought their offer up to 3 years, $6 million, but Owens and Arn Tellem weren't happy with that and seriously contemplated sitting out the entire season and just entering the 1992 draft. To which the Kings said, fine by us. In fact, fuck this. We're looking for trades. If we can't find one, hope you're happy missing out on a paycheck every game this year. Larry Johnson of the Charlotte Hornets was the next domino to fall. He signed for $3 million a year, so Tellem told him, just get the salary somewhere between $2.75 million and $3 million, and we'll sign today. But the Kings were tired of dealing with Owens and Tellem, and they made a trade with the Golden State Warriors to get Mitch Richmond to Sacramento. Owens immediately signed a 7-year, $20 million contract with the Warriors, about $2.9 million a year. And he signed so quickly, in fact, that the Kings suspected that the Warriors had tampered with Owens. Owens just so happened to be in the Bay Area when the deal broke through, allegedly. They didn't pursue any tampering charges with the league or anything, but, obviously Owens was very happy. Mitch Richmond, though, was the opposite. Although it's just an hour and a half up the road from Oakland, Sacramento was a world away in terms of basketball competency. The way that we think about the Kings now, present season excluded, that's about how it was in the 90s as well. The Kings, since relocating to Sacramento from Kansas City, had made the playoffs exactly once in their first season in Sacramento, 1986, and they had just finished up their 4th season in a row with under 30 wins. And it wouldn't be until 5 seasons after acquiring Richmond, not until 1996, that the Kings would even make the playoffs again. So although Richmond would become a 6-time All-Star and forge a Hall of Fame career in Sacramento, the team absolutely sucked. And the last time that the Kings finished above 500 was 1983, and they wouldn't do it again until the year 2000. Even with a Hall of Famer on the roster, they could never even get to 500. So that's why it makes sense that Richmond was greeted by one of his new teammates with him saying, quote, "Welcome to hell." So here's what Richmond had to say about walking into the Kings locker room for the very first time. It was unbelievable. I walk in and the first thing I hear from one of the players is "Welcome to hell." And I'm like, oh shit, damn, what? Oh my God. So I sit down. Now I'm just sitting there. I have my clothes on and Spud Webb comes and sits down right next to me. Spud whispers to me and goes, "Man, I don't wish this on nobody, but I'm glad you're here with me." Richmond, unfortunately, knew that this was basically what awaited him. He had caught wind of a trade brewing during training camp, and he went into Don Nelson's office and said, "I know you've traded me. Don't tell me you traded me to the Sacramento Kings." Nelson said, "I traded you to the Sacramento Kings." And Richmond said, "Thank you very much. Really appreciate that." And then he says, to this day, that was one of the worst days of his life. Now, that was November 1st of 1991, but I'd have to say that November 2nd is probably right up there with the day before for worst days in Mitch Richmond's life. And that's because the Sacramento Kings matched up with the Golden State Warriors, with whom they just made a trade. Now, unfortunately, I was unable to find any footage from this game, probably because Richmond paid to have it wiped from the internet. But I pulled the box score, and you let me know what you think. Obviously, hey, can't tell for sure without watching it, but you let me know if this is a bad loss or not. Golden State Warriors 153, Sacramento Kings 91. After the first quarter, Golden State Warriors 48, Sacramento Kings 18. The Warriors held a 47-point lead at halftime. Is that bad? They won by 62 points, at the time 1 point off from tying the largest margin of victory in NBA history. Victor Alexander, who had made his NBA rookie debut the night before, putting up 3 points and 2 rebounds in 9 minutes, would put up 28 points and 16 rebounds in 42 minutes against the Kings. Chris Mullin had 32 points. Sharunas Marciulionis had 27. This game was garbage time from the jump, but Richmond was not there. He hadn't taken his physical yet, and he was still back in Oakland driving around aimlessly during the game. So he got home to his wife and he asks, "Hey, what's the score of the game?" And she said, "Well, it's over. The Kings lost by 62 points. And Richmond says that he just burst into tears. He called his agent and asked if he could just retire and void his contract and then sign somewhere else the next year. That was not allowed. He had just bought his house in Oakland, so he decided, I'm just going to commute an hour and a half both ways to Sacramento this year. So the day after that game, he drives up to Sacramento. He waits outside the practice facility, assuming that there's going to be a practice. And about an hour and a half later, another teammate arrived and told him they don't have practice for another 2 days. So Richmond is like, "We just lost by 62 and we're not even going to practice." And then he said that practices typically in Sacramento that year were only about 30 minutes long whenever they had them, which was rarely. So he was really down in the dumps. Tim Hardaway and Chris Mullin were sad as well that Richmond had been traded. The Kings players, though, were really happy to have a player of Richmond's caliber in town. Spud Webb compared the trade to giving birth to a newborn baby for some reason. Wayman Tisdale threw some shots at Billy Owens on his way out, said that with Richmond, they know what they have, they know what he can do, they don't have to experiment with playing him in different positions like they would have had to do with Owens. Like I said, he could realistically play 2 through 4. Richmond gutted it out. He resolved to shoot as many times as he could, but as I mentioned, the Kings were horrible this season. They went 29-53. And they fired their head coach, Dick Motta, halfway through the season. Now, before this season, the Kings and the Warriors actually had discussion about making pretty much the same trade. Here's what Jerry Reynolds of the Kings had to say in his memoirs. Prior to the draft, I had talked to Don Nelson of the Warriors about the possibility of trading the 3rd overall pick for Mitch Richmond. He said he had no interest in doing that. I thought it was worth throwing out there because while they were a good team, they were locked into playing small ball. They had that great run TMC combination. I thought they might want to use the pick to get Dikembe Mutombo because they needed a center, and even though he couldn't score, it didn't matter because they had scorers. They needed defense and rebounding. We needed everything, but more than anything else, we needed a star regardless of position. I thought Mitch Richmond, former Rookie of the Year, proven 22 points per game scorer, was a no-risk guy for us. After the draft, Nelly came back to me about Owens. We hadn't signed him yet, and his agent swore that he'd never sign with us, but people made more of that than they should have. That had nothing to do with the trade. We would have traded Billy for Mitch if Billy was signed, sealed, delivered, and went around saying, "My goal in life has always been to be a king." Now, Don Nelson acknowledged that Mutombo would have been a great fit for the Warriors, but then said that they were glad to have Owens as well. Quote, "We would have picked Mutombo had we gotten the pick, but Owens would have been second. He's going to be a very special player. We wanted to get bigger, and this is a 6'9" player who can play anywhere." Now, Billy Owens wasn't happy with where he was at first. Jerry Reynolds wasn't 100% sold on him, but made the pick anyway. And Don Nelson acknowledged that, maybe Mutombo would have been the most logical choice. So it's probably not going to be a surprise to hear that Owens had a pretty unremarkable career. Did play 10 years, 600 games, but underperformed and was traded to Miami for Ronnie Cycli after 3 seasons. After a couple years in Miami, he was then traded to Sacramento. Eventually left Sacramento as a free agent and bounced around a few teams. Basically was trade fodder once he got off of his rookie contract. Made the all-rookie team, but never won any other accolades, and only played on playoff teams 3 times and lost in the first round each time. On being traded back to Sacramento in 1996, 5 years after his extended holdout, Owens expressed some regret on the way that things went down. So he said, quote, "I was young coming in. When you're young, you're thinking about all those other things, money, fame. You want to be in a big city. As long as my teammates accept me, the fans can boo me or cheer me, and that's fine by me." So Owens did end up playing parts of 3 seasons for the Kings. He got to play alongside the all-star Mitch Richmond, to whom he was once thought to be an equivalent asset. Started the majority of the games he played at small forward and put up 10.5 points, 6.5 rebounds, 3 assists on league average shooting. But he was just a pretty anonymous guy. According to Basketball Reference, his career is the most similar to Matt Barnes and Al-Farouq Aminu. So definitely didn't live up to the billing of being the number 3 pick. It definitely stings when you're selected right behind 2 All-Stars in Larry Johnson and Kenny Anderson, and right before a Hall of Famer and 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, Dikembe Mutombo. But he did earn over $26 million in his career, so it wasn't all bad. I'd take his career any day. Although I have this pod where I basically talk about players' careers that sometimes didn't live up to the hype, I am of the opinion that basically any NBA career where you get 1 or 2 multi-year guaranteed contracts is a successful career. As long as you're healthy and happy afterward, you got to go to a bunch of nice restaurants and eat good food. That's all I want is to go to the good restaurants personally. It's a good career. But anyway, that's all I got for you guys today. I appreciate you listening to my ramblings about Jaren Jackson Jr. Love that guy. But hope everybody enjoyed. Follow the socials at Backfired NBA Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out the website, backfirednba.com. And actually, I have this meeting today, this Wednesday, that I'm recording that may lead to some exciting news on the basketball content front. So hopefully that goes well. May have an announcement coming up that's pretty exciting. If so, you'll hear about it. If not, it never existed, and I never mentioned it. So we will talk again in a couple weeks, and have a good one.
Baby, are you gonna be the one that saves me? And after all, you're my wonder wall.